No one came. The tea had gone cold. The candles had melted into stubs. The lemon tart I'd made by hand, with fresh zest and those little sugar curls they used to love, sat untouched in the center of the table. I kept checking the clock, even though I already knew what time it was. A habit, I suppose, or maybe a hope. That someone would be late, but not this late. That they'd knock and laugh and say, "Sorry, traffic was awful," or "We couldn't find your new house," even though I've lived here nearly 20 years. 78. That's how old I turned today. It's a heavy number, isn't it? Not round enough to be a milestone. Not low enough to be hopeful. Just a quiet, solid number. One you feel in your knees when the weather changes. I'd cleaned the house the day before. Dusted the picture frames. Polished the old oak sideboard. Even ironed the lace tablecloth my mother left me. That tablecloth has seen every holiday we've ever had. Sticky fingers, spilled gravy, even a candle burn from my granddaughter's 4th birthday. I nearly threw it out then. I'm glad I didn't. There were 9 chairs around the table. One for each of them. My 2 sons, their wives, 3 grandchildren, and the 2 great-grands who were supposed to bring a little chaos, as they say. I'd bought paper hats, the kind with elastic strings. Ridiculous, maybe, but I thought the children would like them. At noon, I started the kettle. The cake was already done. Chocolate, 3 layers, the kind Michael used to beg me for on his birthday. No nuts, Mom, just chocolate. Lots of it. I smiled when I made it, thinking how surprised he'd be. I imagined them arriving all at once, coats and laughter and hands full of noise. By 1:30, I knew. Still, I waited. At 2:15, the first message came. "Sorry, Mom. Hazel's got a fever. We can't make it. We'll call tonight." No mention of the cake or of the time I'd spent on the decorations. Just a flat little text with a sad face emoji. At 2:30, nothing from the others. By 3, I stopped pretending and turned off the oven. I sat down in the armchair across from the table. The silence in the room was thick. Even the ticking of the clock sounded different, like it didn't know what to do with itself. I stared at the folded napkins. They had little flowers on them. I'd seen them at the store last week and thought, these look like something Rebecca would like. Her favorite color was still lavender, wasn't it? I used to host birthdays for a dozen people. Now I could barely get a call. But that's not fair, is it? I have to be honest. They call. They send flowers on Mother's Day. They even bring the children around at Christmas when they remember. They love me, they say. It's just, everyone's busy. Work, sports, life. You get pushed back, little by little, until you're a card on the fridge and a name on a group chat. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of the cold tea. Sat at the table like a guest at someone else's party. No music, no candles, just the faint hum of the fridge and the ache in my hip that never really leaves anymore. On the sideboard sat 3 wrapped gifts. I'd made them myself. Scarves I'd knitted for each grandchild. I started them in July. Thought it would be a nice surprise. But they'll never see them now, will they? Maybe I'll leave them at their doorstep, like some forgotten Santa. I used to believe that if you gave enough, people would see you. Not just notice, but really see you. The person behind the checkbook. The one who watched them grow, who sacrificed, who was always there. But today, on my 78th birthday, I was not seen. And in the quiet that followed, something settled in me. Not anger, not yet. Just a kind of knowing, A final, solid realization. If no one shows up for you, maybe it's time to show up for yourself. I didn't throw anything away. Not the cake, not the lemon tart, not the cucumber sandwiches I'd cut into neat little triangles with the crusts removed. I wrapped them all carefully in plastic, slid them into the fridge one by one, the birthday napkins too. I folded them back into the packet. Silly, I know. But there was something unbearable about tossing them in the bin so soon, like discarding the hope I'd wrapped around them. By evening, the messages had stopped. 3 in total. 1 from Michael, 1 from Joanna, my daughter-in-law, who always sounds like she's apologizing for being alive, and 1 from Rebecca, my eldest granddaughter. So sorry, Grandma. I had a shift change and couldn't swap. Happy birthday. Hope it was lovely. There was a heart emoji at the end. That felt worse than nothing at all. No one called. The phone sat on the charger like a quiet witness. Not a single ring. No voicemail. No accidental dial-ins. It was my birthday, and the people I'd brought into this world couldn't be bothered to hear my voice. At 7:30, I sat down with a bowl of soup I hadn't intended to eat and stared at the kitchen wall. There's a crack there, just beneath the cupboard. It's been there for years. I remember George saying he'd fix it when the weather got better. That was 2 springs before he died. Now I just run my finger over it sometimes, like a scar. I thought about lighting the candles anyway, just to see what it would feel like. But I didn't. There's no point singing to yourself unless you're under 5 or over 90, and I'm neither. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the knowing. Knowing they remembered. Of course they remembered, and chose something else. A co-worker's birthday dinner. A late client call. A child's cough that was probably just tiredness. Excuses that sounded like truth until you looked too closely. I wondered what they'd tell their friends. That they visited me all the time? That I didn't want to fuss? That I was the kind of woman who preferred quiet birthdays with a good book? They didn't know me anymore. Not really. I washed the dishes and set them in the rack to dry. The kitchen light buzzed a little. That flickering hum that always comes when the bulb's about to go. Another thing no one ever notices unless I mention it. I won't. Not anymore. The house was so clean it felt like a museum. Everything in its place. Everything ready for people who didn't come. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the living room, trying not to feel old. But it's hard, you know? When the chair creaks under you and the blanket on your lap is the only warm thing you can count on. I reached for the album. It lives on the bottom shelf, beneath the old Bible and the crossword puzzle books. The cover is green velvet, worn at the edges, the gold, Our Family lettering, faded from years of fingers. I pulled it onto my lap and opened it to the first page. George and me, 1968. He's holding me like we've just discovered joy. I'm in a blue dress, smiling like the world's still kind. I was 21. He was 24. We didn't know anything, but we thought we did. We thought love would solve it all. The next page? Michael's birth. His tiny hands curled into fists like he was already ready to fight. Then Jonathan, 2 years later. My quiet boy, always watching. Page after page, a life of birthdays and scraped knees and family picnics and school plays and graduations. So many smiles. So many candles. Always people around the table. I stopped at a picture of Rebecca at 5. She's blowing out candles on a pink cake, and I'm kneeling beside her, holding her shoulders so she doesn't fall forward. I remember that day. She'd wanted a unicorn party, So I stayed up half the night, cutting glitter stars from cardboard and making little horn-shaped hats. I closed the album. Gratitude turns sour when it goes unspoken too long. You wait, you forgive, you make excuses. But eventually, the silence gets heavy. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a while. And then the doorbell rang. I nearly dropped my teacup. Who comes at 9 o'clock at night? I shuffled to the door, heart oddly hopeful, and opened it. There stood a young man in a red jacket with the logo of the local delivery service. He held a white box and looked unsure of himself. Nancy Patterson? Yes? Someone sent you this. From Sugar and Pine Bakery. Happy birthday. I stared at the box. It had a ribbon and a little card attached. Inside, another cake. Store-bought. Pretty. Impersonal. I opened the card. It just said, "From all of us. Sorry we couldn't be there." No names, no signatures, just that. "Thank you," I said quietly. The delivery boy hesitated. "Do you want me to bring it in for you?" I looked at his face. He couldn't have been more than 20. Tired eyes, faint stubble, probably someone's son, probably hungry. "Would you like a piece?" I asked. He blinked. "What? Cake? Would you like some?" He smiled, surprised. Yeah, sure. That'd be great." I stepped aside and let him in. He sat awkwardly at the edge of the chair, like someone not used to being invited in. His name was Luis. 21, just started with the delivery service a few months ago. Lived with his mom and younger sister on Cedar Street. Said he'd never had fresh-baked lemon tart before. I cut us both slices. Served them on the birthday plates I'd laid out that morning, the ones no one else used. He looked at his fork like it was too nice for him, and for a second I saw Michael at 12 when we visited that fancy restaurant, and he tried to hold the cutlery the grown-up way. "It's really good," Luis said around a bite, surprised. "It's real lemon," I said. "Zested, not bottled." He nodded, like that meant something special. Maybe it did. We sat in silence for a while, the kitchen lit by the overhead bulb and the soft hum of the fridge. Outside, the wind had picked up. You could hear the leaves scraping against the windows like fingernails. Luis looked around the room, at the photographs, the little wooden clock, the placemats I'd embroidered years ago. "Feels like a real home in here," he said. I don't know why, but that struck something in me. Not warm, exactly, but human. Real. Most people don't say things like that. Most people don't even see it. "You'd think," I said. "But sometimes I wonder if a home's still a home when no one comes to it anymore." He looked down at his cake, unsure what to say. I didn't need him to say anything. I offered him tea, and he accepted. We talked a little about the weather, his classes. He was trying to get back into community college next semester. His sister wanted to be a nurse. His mother worked nights at the hospital cafeteria. "She makes the best arroz con pollo," he said proudly, "but no one believes it's homemade because she doesn't write anything down, just knows." I smiled. "That kind of knowing comes from doing," I told him. "You cook something long enough, with enough love, it writes itself into your hands." It was almost 10 when he left. I packed him a small box with slices of both cakes and a few sandwiches wrapped tight. "For your mom," I said, "and your sister." He looked like he wanted to say more, but only nodded. "Thank you for the company," I added, holding the door. "Thank you," he said. Then he paused. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Patterson." I watched him walk down the porch steps and out into the night, red jacket catching the wind. I closed the door quietly and leaned against it for a moment. So there it was. The only guest at my birthday was a boy who came by accident. And somehow, it mattered more than anything the rest of them didn't do. The house felt different after he left. Not less empty, exactly, but less cruel, as if the day hadn't been wasted entirely. I took the rest of the cake out of the fridge and started slicing. One by one, I wrapped the pieces in wax paper and packed them into small takeaway boxes I kept for leftovers. Something moved in me. Not grief. Something else. A quiet refusal to let this day end the way it began. I grabbed a pen from the drawer and made a list on the back of an old grocery receipt. Miriam, grocery clerk, always remembers my name. Mr. Patel, the mailman, kind eyes. Gloria, pharmacist, who always explains my prescriptions twice. Nurse Tasha, from the clinic, the only one who ever asks if I live alone. Luis's family, I'd find their address somehow. There were more. People who saw me, maybe only in passing, but they looked me in the eye, smiled, took a moment. I wasn't going to cry over those who hadn't come, not anymore. I'd give these cakes to people who never pretended to care. They just did. The next morning, I got up before 7. I tied my hair back and put on my good sweater, the one with the pearl buttons that still shined when the light hit them right. I packed the boxes into 2 large shopping bags and stepped out into the chill. The town looked the same as always. Sleepy, neat, a little gray around the edges. But something in me had shifted. My steps felt steadier, my jaw tighter. At the corner store, Miriam looked up from behind the till and smiled like always. But when I handed her a box and said, "It's lemon tart. Made it yesterday. For you," her eyes widened. "For me? You always ask how I'm doing," I said. "And you always mean it." She took the box like it was gold. At the post boxes, Mr. Patel was sorting mail in his neat, brisk way. I offered him a slice and told him he had the best handwriting in town. He laughed and looked like he might cry. By the time I reached the pharmacy, my bags were half empty, and my heart felt a little fuller. Each face I saw reminded me I hadn't been invisible to everyone, and maybe, just maybe, I didn't need family to be seen. When I got home, the house no longer felt like a mausoleum. The silence was still there, but now it felt chosen, like something I'd invited in, not something forced on me. I set the empty shopping bags down by the door and made myself a cup of coffee, strong and hot. Sat at the kitchen table with it, wrapped my fingers around the mug, and let myself breathe for the first time in 2 days. No one had called, not to ask how the birthday went, not to apologize for missing it, not even to pretend. And oddly, that made it easier. Because silence speaks loudest when you stop making excuses for it. That afternoon, I walked into town again. Not to give anything this time, but to feel the rhythm of life. People bustling in and out of shops. Teenagers dragging their feet behind their parents. Old men arguing softly about sports on the bench by the bakery. Life happening, whether I was part of it or not. At the cafe, I bought a coffee to go and left a note with my name and number for Luis, in case he or his mother ever wanted the lemon tart recipe. Just in case, I wrote, from one cook to another. I don't know what got into me next. Maybe it was the fresh air. Maybe the look in Miriam's eyes when I handed her that cake. But something in me decided, if they wouldn't show up for me, I'd throw another party. A real one. Not for the people who forgot me, but for the ones who saw me. I sat down at the small bench outside the florist shop, pulled out a notepad from my bag. I always carry one, habit from another life, and made a new list. It wasn't long, but it felt true. Luis, Nurse Tasha, Gloria from the pharmacy, Miriam, Mr. Patel, the bus driver with the scar over his brow who always lowers the step without me asking. Even Joyce, the widow from down the block, who always complains, but once brought me soup when I slipped on the steps. Maybe even Audrey, the teenager who bags my groceries and once offered to walk me home in the rain. I'd throw a gathering, not a party with balloons and folded napkins, but something warm, human, tea, homemade food, a table that didn't ask anyone to prove they belonged. That night, I sat with my planner open, thinking through what I'd need. Chairs, dishes, a few tablecloths. I had it all. Nothing fancy. No one I was inviting cared about matching forks. It was the being there that mattered. I picked a day, the following Saturday. That gave me 6 days. Plenty of time to bake. Plenty of time to choose differently. On Monday, I started making calls. I asked for Nurse Tasha at the clinic. They transferred me. I told her who I was. She remembered right away. "I was just thinking about you," she said. "After I saw the candles in your window Friday night, I thought, I hope she isn't alone." I paused. "I was," I said, "but I'm not planning to be again." I explained the idea. A small gathering, nothing fancy. Tea and pie and music, maybe, if someone brought a radio. There was a pause. Then, "You're inviting me?" "Yes." "But I'm just your nurse." "No," I said. "You're someone who saw me when I wasn't being seen." She didn't speak for a second. Then she said, "I'll bring cookies. My mother's recipe." I hung up and sat back. One yes. One real yes. The rest followed like rain on dry ground. Miriam said she'd bring flowers. Mr. Patel offered samosas from his wife's kitchen. Luis's mother called me herself and offered arroz con pollo. "Luis told me about your tart," she said. He looked like someone finally remembered his name. Even Joyce said yes, after complaining about how things like this never happen anymore. Each call felt like reclaiming a piece of something I didn't know I'd lost. Not my youth, not family, but connection. I pulled out the old record player from the hallway closet, dusted it off, tested a few scratched vinyls. Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald. Some classical I never understood, but George loved. By Thursday, the house was humming. I baked apple pies, sliced cucumbers, set out linen napkins that hadn't been used since Easter 3 years ago. Everything smelled like cinnamon and something older, something steadier. It wasn't a birthday party. It was something better. It was mine. Saturday came with a soft wind and pale sun. The kind of weather that doesn't promise anything, just lets the day become what it wants to be. I was up at 6. The house smelled like pie crust and roasted chicken. I'd set the table the night before. Simple but careful. A white cotton cloth. A mix of dishes. Not matching, but honest. Cups that had belonged to my mother. Glasses that had tiny chips on the rims but still held water just fine. The chairs were pulled close together. I wanted it to feel like a table for equals. Not one head seat. No one at the end. Just space. Room for everyone. At 8, I opened the windows. Fresh air swept in, carrying with it the faint sounds of the town waking up. A bus down on Main, the distant bark of a dog, church bells testing their chimes for tomorrow. I put on my blue cardigan, the one with the small repair in the left sleeve, and waited. Not nervously, not like before. This time I knew. Whoever came by choice. At 10:02, the first knock came. It was Miriam. She wore a soft gray coat and held a bunch of yellow flowers, not a bouquet from the shop, but ones clearly cut from her garden. Daffodils and something else I couldn't name. "I brought sunshine," she said with a shy smile. "You did," I said, and let her in. She stood in the entry for a moment, taking it all in. "It smells like childhood in here," she whispered. By 10:15, Mr. Patel had arrived with a warm container tucked under his arm and a proud look on his face. "You like spice, I hope." "I like kindness," I said, "and that smells like both." One by one, they came. Nurse Tasha with a tin of her mother's cookies and a hug that didn't feel like a nurse's. It felt like someone who meant it. Luis, with his sister in tow. Sophia, bright-eyed and nervous, holding a plate of pastelitos like they were treasures. Joyce came last, muttering that the bus was late and that her knees didn't approve of stairs, but she brought a jar of raspberry jam and a folded napkin embroidered with her initials. "You said no gifts, so I brought something I already had." I set it at the table like a crown. There were 9 of us. Fitting, in a way. The same number of chairs I'd set the week before, for people who never showed. Now each one was filled. We didn't make speeches. There was no toast. Just plates passed back and forth. Forks tapping gently. Quiet laughter. A rhythm that felt ancient and right. We spoke in turns, naturally. Louise told the story of a delivery to the wrong address that turned into a friendship with an old widow who taught him how to play chess. Miriam talked about the day her dog ran into the bakery and ate 3 croissants before anyone could stop him. Joyce, surprisingly, told the story of how her husband used to dance with her in the kitchen to Louis Armstrong every Sunday morning, and how she still plays the record sometimes, just for herself. It wasn't all happy. Tasha mentioned the long night shifts, the patients who died without family, the way hospitals smell at 3 a.m. Mr. Patel spoke softly about his first winter here, not knowing anyone, delivering mail with fingers numb to the bone, and how one woman, a stranger, had invited him in for tea. "We all think we're invisible," he said, "until someone sees us." I didn't cry. I thought I might. But instead, I felt warm, present, not a relic or a burden or a background character, but here, in this room, at this table, with these people. For dessert, I brought out the leftover birthday cake. They didn't know it had been meant for someone else, that it had sat untouched in my fridge for a week. Now, it belonged to this moment. I lit one candle, not for a wish, but for the sake of light, and we all took a slice. Sophia asked hesitantly, "Whose birthday is it?" I looked around the table. "Mine," I said. "Last week." There was a pause. Then Luis raised his fork and said, "Well then, happy birthday." Everyone joined in, not loudly, not in unison, but each voice, sincere. "Happy birthday, Nancy. Many more? To your health." I smiled, and this time the cake was eaten, every crumb. After everyone left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt still, full in the way a room is after music, not loud anymore, but echoing. I cleared the plates slowly, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want the afternoon to end. Their cups still held the imprint of their hands, a faint smear of frosting on the tablecloth where Sophia had giggled too hard. The folded napkin Joyce brought sat by the window, catching the last of the daylight. I didn't rush to clean it all up. I sat back down instead. Let myself breathe. I could still hear Mr. Patel's quiet voice, Tasha's laugh, the sound of chairs scraping back when Luis helped his sister to her feet. These weren't the people I'd raised, but they were the ones who'd stayed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to chase anyone's love. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's roof, I opened the hallway closet and pulled out the old tin box where I keep important papers. Not dramatic things, just what matters. Inside, a small ledger where I track bills, a folder with my will, my marriage license, George's death certificate, the letter from the lawyer when we paid off the mortgage. Notes I'd written to myself over the years, things to remember, to decide later. Later had come. I pulled the will from the folder and placed it on the table. Read through it, line by line, as if it belonged to someone else. Everything I'd written, the house, the savings, the certificates, the bonds, would go to my sons. At the time, it had made sense. But now I couldn't remember the last time either of them had asked me what I wanted. Not what I could give, what I needed. Not in decades. Even the last conversation I'd had with Michael had ended with a casual, "You're still good with that monthly transfer, right, Mom?" No, "How are you sleeping?" No, "Is the roof holding up through the rain?" I'd said yes, because that's what I always said. But something had broken last week. Not loudly, not with yelling, just a quiet shatter I'd felt somewhere in my ribs. I pulled a notepad toward me and started writing. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was just true. I listed the names again. Miriam, Mr. Patel, Tasha, Luis, Sophia, Joyce. People who had nothing to gain and came anyway. People who sat with me, laughed with me, broke bread with me. People who gave me back to myself. I made a note to call my lawyer Monday. The will would be rewritten. I'd set up a trust. Not something messy. I wasn't going to try to control everything after I was gone, but I could make sure the money didn't go to people who only remembered me when their mortgage was due. The house could become something more. I'd read, years ago, about women turning their homes into community spaces, safe havens, quiet libraries, afternoon tea circles. Nothing official, nothing grand. Just homes where people could go when the world forgot them. That night, I stood at the front window and looked out at the street. Empty, but not lonely. I thought of Miriam walking home with her flowers, of Luis telling his mother about the gathering, of Tasha texting someone, "You won't believe where I was today." And I smiled. They'd seen me, and I'd seen them. The next morning, I took a walk. Not to buy anything, just to move. I passed the bakery, the park, the school where the kids were pouring out for recess. I walked past the house where George and I had first rented a room when we were young and trying to make the math of life work. That walk used to hurt. Too many memories piled on top of each other. Now it just felt honest. I came home to a voicemail from Rebecca. "Hi, Grandma. Sorry I missed your birthday. Things got crazy with work, and the boys had that school thing. I hope it was nice. I'll try to call later." She didn't ask how it had been, she just assumed it was. I didn't call back. Not out of spite. Just, I didn't have the energy for pretending anymore. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began writing a letter. Not to my sons. To Sophia. "Dear Sophia, thank you for coming to my tea. I know you didn't know me, not really, but you smiled like you did. You reminded me what it's like to be young and open-hearted. You reminded me of myself once. I wanted you to know that mattered. That you mattered. I hope you keep showing up like that. For people. For yourself. It's rarer than you think. I folded the letter neatly, tucked it into an envelope, and wrote her name in clean cursive across the front. That afternoon, I walked it to the mailbox myself. The mailbox gave its usual creak as I slid the letter in. That sound, old and slightly reluctant, felt like a fitting reply. Like even the metal was saying, "Are you sure?" And I was. I'd never been more certain of anything in years. I walked slowly back to the house, the chill sneaking through the sleeves of my cardigan. October had a way of doing that, pretending to be gentle, then catching you off guard. The leaves had started to fall properly now, blanketing the sidewalk in that soft crunch I used to love as a child. The porch steps groaned as I climbed them, same as always. When George was alive, he'd meant to replace them. "Come spring," he used to say. Every winter we'd joke about them. "Those steps are going to murder one of us one day." He never got the chance to fix them, and I never did either. Maybe I liked the sound, the stubbornness in it, the way it reminded me something still had to hold my weight. Inside, the answering machine was blinking again. 2 messages. One from Jonathan, quick, clipped, and half-hearted. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to say sorry we missed the birthday. It's been a madhouse. Maybe next weekend? We can take you out to lunch. Let me know." He didn't sound like he meant it. He sounded like someone checking off a box. The second was from my neighbor, Bev, asking if I still wanted her old vacuum. I didn't. But at least she'd called about something real. I didn't bother calling Jonathan back. Instead, I pulled on a light jacket and walked next door. Bev was out on her porch, snapping dead stems off her potted mums. "You came for the vacuum?" she asked, not looking up. "No," I said. "But I'll take it anyway. Let's sit for a minute first." She shrugged, wiped her hands on her pants, and motioned to the swing. It groaned even louder than my porch steps, but we both settled in. For a while, we just watched the street. Then she asked, "You doing okay?" "I am," I said. "Better than I've been in a long time." Bev snorted. "Well, that's a miracle." We talked a bit, about nothing in particular. Then, as the sun dipped lower, I said, "I'm thinking of turning my house into something more." She turned to me. "More what? More than just a place where I wait for people who don't come?" Bev didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. She just looked at me, then nodded. "You mean like a soup kitchen?" "No, not that," I said. Something smaller, quieter, a space where people can feel safe, seen, maybe a table, a kettle, a place to sit if they need to cry or breathe or just be. Bev nodded again, slower this time. "You'd be good at that." I swallowed hard. "I was good at raising people," I said. "Just not the ones who came from me, apparently." She didn't argue. She just reached over, patted my knee, and said, "It's not always the roots that hold us up. Sometimes it's the hands we find later." That night, I slept without pills. In the morning, the phone rang again. I nearly didn't answer. But the screen said, "Thompson and Avery Law," and I knew what it was. Mr. Avery, my lawyer since George passed, had that calm way of speaking that made you feel like your decisions were just business, not the tectonic shifts they really were. "We can change the will, of course," he said. "Reassign assets, set up a trust. Do you want the boys notified?" "No," I said. "They'll find out in time." "And the property? The house?" "I want to place it under a private trust. Designate it for community use. I'll send you the details. I'm still thinking it through." He paused. "Are you sure, Nancy?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. This house gave its best years to people who didn't see it. Now it's time it went to those who do. We went over the logistics, dates, signatures, fees. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter. I stood by the kitchen window and watched the leaves blow across the yard. Thought about all the hours I'd spent hoping they'd call, visit, say thank you. Hoping that one day the door would open and someone would say, "We remember what you did for us." But hoping is a waiting game. And I was tired of waiting. I brewed a fresh pot of tea, set 2 cups on the table just in case someone stopped by. And then the doorbell rang. It was Gloria from the pharmacy. She held a small tin of ginger biscuits and an envelope. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said shyly. "But I heard from Miriam that you were gathering people. I thought maybe I could—" "I don't know. Just say thank you." "For what?" "For remembering me," she said. "No one remembers the person behind the counter." I let her in. We drank tea. She told me about her cat and her mother's arthritis and how sometimes the pharmacy customers don't even look her in the eye. And I listened, not as a duty, but because I wanted to. When she left, I stood at the door a long time, breathing in the scent of her biscuits still lingering in the hallway. The house didn't feel like just a house anymore. It was beginning to feel like something else. Something opening. By the end of that week, I'd bought a fresh notepad, the kind with thick paper and a red margin line, and labeled the front cover in blue ink. Plans for the house. It sat on the table next to the sugar bowl, beside the salt shaker and the folded napkin, with Joyce's initials still resting where I'd left it. I wasn't in a hurry. Every morning, after breakfast, I'd write something new in the notebook. Not rules. I'd lived too long with rules. Just ideas. Thoughts. Dreams I hadn't let myself have in years. One afternoon a week, open tea hours. No RSVP needed. Small shelf of books by the window. Let people take what they need, bring what they can. A quiet corner with a soft chair and a blanket. For those who just want to sit and not talk. It wasn't much, but it was real. I called Mr. Avery again and asked about zoning, about liability. He said he'd look into it and that it might be complicated. Complicated, I said, has never stopped me before. Then I called Sophia. Louise answered the phone, and I could hear her laughing in the background. Something about burnt rice and too much garlic. When she got on the line, she sounded breathless. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked quickly. "No, dear," I said. "Quite the opposite." I told her I wanted to set up a weekly group. Nothing official, just something quiet and regular. I asked if she'd help me plan it, if she'd bring her friends or whoever needed somewhere warm to go. "I don't know many people," she said, "but I'll come." That was enough. The first tea circle was small, just Sophia, Gloria, and Joyce, who insisted on bringing her own teacup because your mugs are too fat for my fingers. I didn't argue. I just laid out shortbread, warm scones, and the strawberry jam Gloria had brought as a surprise. We sat for nearly 2 hours, talking, listening, not solving the world's problems, but acknowledging that they existed. Joyce told a story about the year her husband died and how no one had brought her soup because they didn't know what to say. Gloria talked about how hard it was being the nice one in customer service, how people took, and kindness became invisible. Sophia just sat for a long time, silent, her hands curled around the tea. "I didn't know people talked like this," she said at last. "Like real, I touched her hand lightly. It's never too late to learn how. After they left, I didn't rush to clean. I sat in the quiet room, in the echo of voices that had finally felt like they belonged here. Not because of blood, but because of something deeper. Choice. 2 days later, Rebecca showed up, unannounced. She stood on the porch like a stranger, unsure whether to knock or turn away. I opened the door before she could decide. "Grandma," she said, eyes wide, breath caught in her chest. "Rebecca," I said, my voice even. "It's been a while. I tried calling. You didn't answer." "I've been busy," I said. "Would you like to come in?" She nodded quickly, like a child being offered a second chance. We sat in the living room. I offered tea. She declined, fidgeted with the strap of her purse. "Dad told me you're changing the will." So, that's what brought her. Not the birthday, not the silence after. The money. "I am," I said simply. "But you always said—" "I said a lot of things," I interrupted, most of them hoping it would make people treat me better. She looked stung. "Grandma, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to hurt me," I said. "But you did. All of you did. Not with cruelty. With absence." Rebecca looked down. "I missed your birthday," she said quietly. "I know that. I knew it when I saw the date on the calendar and didn't call anyway. I don't even have a good reason." I didn't speak. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. "I wrote you something. I don't know if it helps." I took the paper, unfolded it slowly. It was a letter, handwritten, careful cursive, just a page. I didn't read it then. Instead, I looked at her. My granddaughter. The one I'd once held through fevers and heartbreak, through scraped knees and teenage drama. "I loved you like my own child," I said softly. "You still have a place here, but not at the head of the table." She nodded. "I understand." When she left, she didn't hug me. She didn't cry. She just touched my hand and said, "If you ever want to talk, I'll listen." It wasn't redemption, but it was honest. I sat down and read the letter. It was clumsy, rambling, but real. An apology without excuses. That night, I added another note to the notebook. Maybe once a month. Family allowed. But only if they come as people, not heirs. By the third tea circle, the chairs were full. Not all the same faces, but all familiar now. Miriam brought a neighbor. Tasha came on her lunch break, still in scrubs, tired but smiling. Even Joyce dragged in a new widow from her church, a woman named Clara with trembling hands and a whisper of a voice. No one asked where anyone came from. They just made space. Sophia had started baking. Little things. Banana bread, lemon cookies, the kind that made the house smell like warmth before the door even opened. She didn't say much, but she always came early and stayed late. Washed dishes without being asked. Swept crumbs off the floor when no one noticed. "You're building something," she said one afternoon, her eyes wide. "Not building," I said. "Reclaiming." She didn't ask what I meant. Maybe she already knew. That day, I brought out the old radio from the hall closet, the one George used to fiddle with endlessly, trying to get it to catch stations that didn't exist anymore. I'd thought it was broken, but when I turned the dial, it came to life. A soft crackle, then music. Not clear, but enough. I set it on the windowsill and let it play. Clara hummed along to something slow and forgotten. Gloria tapped her cup gently in rhythm. No one spoke for a while. The quiet had shape, weight, peace. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from sadness, Not anymore. From fullness. The kind that comes when you finally remember who you are after years of being everyone else's helper. I walked through the house in my slippers, trailing my fingers along the walls. Each room had changed, though the furniture hadn't moved. It was in the air. A softness. A presence. Like the house had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. In the living room, I stood before the mantel and looked at the old family photos. There I was, with Michael at age 5, his hair sticking up like a dandelion. Jonathan holding a soccer trophy, beaming. Rebecca at her high school graduation, cheeks flushed, eyes full of something I used to think was promise. I didn't feel anger, just distance. These pictures weren't lies. They were true, once. But they'd become fossils. Proof of a time that no longer claimed me. And that was all right. The next morning, the doorbell rang just after 10. It was Mr. Avery, my lawyer. He wore his usual gray suit and that tired smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Just need a few signatures," he said. "Then it's done." We sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon and ink. He passed me papers, explained clauses. I nodded, read carefully, then signed. My name over and over, reclaiming ground. "Are you sure you don't want to notify the family now?" he asked gently. "I've notified the people who matter," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled, this time for real. After he left, I made a fresh pot of tea and sat at the window, watching a blue jay hop along the fence. There was a time I would have taken a picture. Now, I just watched. The phone rang in the afternoon. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Mrs. Patterson?" A hesitant voice. "This is Ezra. I work with Luis. He said I could call you. I hope that's okay." "Of course," I said. "What can I do for you?" He paused. "I heard you were opening your house for people, not like a shelter or anything, just a place." "That's right. Can I come?" I didn't ask why, didn't press. "Yes," I said. "We gather on Wednesdays. There's tea, music, no obligations." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "I'll bring something." "You don't have to." "I want to," he said softly. It's been a long time since I brought anything anywhere. When he came that Wednesday, he brought a tin of cocoa and a story about losing his mother. No one interrupted. No one gave advice. We just listened. Sometimes that's all people need, to speak into a space that doesn't try to fix them. Later, as I was washing cups, Sophia asked, "Do you think they'll come back?" "Who?" "Your family." "The ones who missed your birthday." I wiped a plate slowly. "They might. And will you let them in?" I thought for a moment. "I'll open the door," I said, "but I won't set a place for someone who won't sit with both feet in." She nodded. "That's fair." It was. That night, I added a new page to the notebook. We are not waiting. We are welcoming. There's a difference. And then quietly, I am not missing. I am found. The first time someone cried in my kitchen, it wasn't me. It was Clara. She'd brought a small jar of homemade apple butter wrapped in a piece of fabric tied with twine. It sat untouched on the table for almost an hour, and then, without warning, she reached for it with shaking hands and said, "I haven't made this since Harold died." No one said anything at first. Joyce shifted in her chair. Miriam reached for Clara's hand. "I used to make it every fall," Clara whispered. "He'd say it tasted like October. I stopped after he passed. Couldn't stand the smell of it." She looked around the table, her eyes brimming. "But this year," I thought, Maybe someone else would like it. I do, I said, my voice steady. I already do. She cried then, not loudly, just the way people do when they've held something in too long, and no one rushed her. We let the tears come, poured tea, passed the bread, let her be human without fixing her. It struck me as I sat there. No one in that room was trying to be strong. Not in the performative way, not with tight smiles or upbeat talk. They were just being. And somehow, that made them stronger than anyone else I'd known. Later, when Clara had gone home, Joyce lingered behind. She stood by the door holding her coat, looking like she wanted to say something and hadn't figured out how. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, then frowned. "I think so. You know, I didn't like you at first." I raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" "You were so neat, so polite. I thought you were one of those women who never suffered." I laughed softly. "Well, I've gotten messier, and I've suffered plenty." She gave a tight smile. "Yeah, I see that now." She left without another word, but I noticed. The next time she came, she brought 2 napkins, one for me and one to leave behind. The group was growing, not in numbers, in depth. Even Luis, who still didn't speak much, started bringing books to trade. "This one's about a man who builds a boat in his yard," he said once. "Everyone laughs at him, but he keeps building." "You like him?" I asked. "I like what he does when the storm comes." I knew what he meant. Sophia had started keeping track. Who brought what days were best, ideas for next month. She didn't call it organizing, but it was. I let her. It was her way of staying rooted. One afternoon, she handed me a flyer she'd designed. Warm House Wednesdays. Tea, talk, and quiet company. Simple. No address, just a phone number. Mine. I looked at it a long time. "You want to put these up?" I asked. "If you're ready," she said. "No pressure." I wasn't sure if I was, but I nodded. She posted one at the library, another at the community center, left a small stack at the bakery, and people began to call. Not many, but enough. A man named Bernard came the next week. Early 50s, quiet, smelled faintly of sawdust and loneliness. Said he hadn't sat at a table with others since his mother died 6 years ago. He didn't stay long. But he left a note on the counter. "Thank you for letting me remember I exist." That note stayed on the fridge. Next to it, I pinned a photo Gloria had brought, an old one of her as a girl standing in front of a shop window with her grandmother. "She taught me how to brew proper tea," she said. "The rest I learned from watching people be unkind." "You've learned a lot then," I said. She smiled, but not with her eyes. At home, I kept writing. The notebook filled up faster than I expected. Things to keep in the kitchen: lemons, honey, candles, 2 good pens. Don't forget to replace the sugar bowl when it gets clumpy. People notice. Never assume someone has someone. And later, if no one calls you, you are still a person. If they never come back, you still mattered. On the final page, one morning, I wrote a question. "What would you do if you weren't waiting for someone else to care?" I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew I was getting closer. That Friday, as I swept the porch, Rebecca showed up again. No warning, just her and a tin in her hands. "I made cookies," she said, not meeting my eyes. "They're not as good as yours." "Probably not," I said, "but I'll try them." She smiled, a real one this time. "I read the letter again," she said. "The one you sent me." "I didn't send it," I corrected. "You handed it to me. That's different." Still, I wanted to say thank you for reading it. We sat on the steps, She talked a bit about work, about the boys, about how hard it was to call me after so long. I thought you wouldn't want to hear from me. I didn't, I said. Not until you stopped showing up just to be seen. She nodded. I get it now. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. But I let her stay. Rebecca stayed for over an hour. She didn't ask for anything, didn't bring up the will or money or what she used to call the family home with that hungry, possessive tone I'd come to expect. She just sat beside me, watching the wind stir the trees, hands tucked into her sleeves like a child. We didn't say much after the first few minutes, and it didn't feel strained, just quiet, easy. When she finally stood to leave, she looked at the house like she was seeing it differently. It feels warmer in there, she said. Not just the heater, the whole place. I didn't reply. Let her feel what she needed to. After she left, I walked slowly back into the kitchen. The air still carried the faint scent of her cookies, burnt at the edges, but earnest. I opened the tin and took a bite. Too much cinnamon. Still, I finished it. Later that evening, as I was folding linens, the phone rang. Not the house phone, the little prepaid mobile I kept for the group, the number on the flyers. I answered. Hi, a woman said, her voice cautious. I got your number from the board at the clinic. I saw your flyer. Are you still doing the tea gatherings? Yes, I said. Wednesday afternoons. No need to call ahead unless you want to. There was a pause. I heard a child in the background, then a door closing. I've got a boy, she said. 7. Is that okay? Of course. I just need somewhere quiet. Not forever, just for a while. Come, I said. We'll find you a chair. She gave her name, Leanne, and thanked me 3 times before hanging up. That Sunday, I found a second-hand bookshelf at the flea market. Luis helped carry it into the house. We placed it by the window where the sun came in strongest. I stocked it with what I had. Some old novels, a few cookbooks, a worn poetry collection George had underlined like scripture. Sophia brought 2 more books the next day, wrapped in brown paper. One was about grief, the other about gardening. For balance, she said with a wink. The house was shifting again, not growing, grounding. I bought more chairs, borrowed a folding table from Bev, who now came every other week, just to check on your scones, though she always stayed for hours. I wrote another list in the notebook. People who sat down and stayed longer than they planned. Luis, Sophia, Gloria, Clara Bernard, Ezra Joyce, Rebecca Leanne, soon. Some brought food. Some brought stories. Some brought silence. All brought presents. That week, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was the letter George wrote me on our 40th anniversary. I hadn't read it since the day he died. It had felt too sacred then, too painful. But now my hands were steady. He'd written in blue ink, his handwriting loose but certain. You were always the brave one, Nancy, the one who made a home out of scraps. If you ever forget who you are, look around. You'll see yourself in the things you saved. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, I remember now. That Wednesday, Leanne came. Her son's name was Theo. He was small, sharp-eyed, and quiet, with the kind of energy that waits at the edges, ready to run, but hoping he won't have to. He clung to her at first, sat on her lap, wouldn't speak. We made space. Clara brought coloring books she'd picked up at the pharmacy. Luis found a little chair from somewhere. Gloria handed him a ginger snap and said nothing at all. By the end of the hour, Theo was curled up in the reading corner, fast asleep with a blanket over his feet. Leanne looked like she might fall apart at the sight. She didn't cry. She just mouthed, "Thank you." After they left, I added to the notebook, "Sometimes people need silence more than tea. Give them both." That night, I turned off all the lights except the one above the mantel, sat on the sofa with a cup of cocoa, and watched the shadows dance. There had been so many years where I waited for joy to knock on the door. Now it lived here. Not loud, not flashy. Just present. Constant. Honest. I took the family photos off the mantel, wrapped them in tissue, and placed them in the drawer with George's letter. Then I placed a new photo frame on the shelf. It held the flyer Sophia made, the first one. Proof of the day I chose to stop waiting and start inviting. And under it, I wrote, in small print, "Welcome home." The first time Theo laughed, it startled everyone. We'd just finished our tea. Joyce was telling a story about her sister's wedding dress catching fire on a gas stove. "Don't ask," she said, which of course made everyone ask. And suddenly, in the middle of it, he let out this high, clear giggle. Not polite, not cautious. Real. Leanne froze. She looked at him like he'd grown wings. Then she looked at me, not smiling yet, just searching. "He hasn't laughed like that since his dad left," she whispered later, when we were washing mugs together in the sink. "He used to do it all the time, over nothing, but since the move, since everything, I thought it was gone." "It's not gone," I said, handing her a dish towel. "It's just been waiting." We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. The house had begun teaching me something I hadn't expected: how to sit beside someone's pain without naming it, fixing it, or fearing it. Just being there, letting it breathe. It had taken me most of my life to learn that. Now I taught it by doing. That Friday, Bernard came by early. He knocked gently, holding a small toolbox. "Thought I could take a look at those porch steps," he said. "They creak like they're trying to say something." "They are," I said. "They're saying, 'Don't forget me.'" He grinned. "Mind if I answer them with nails?" I let him work. While he hammered and measured, I brought out lemonade and cookies, sat on the porch swing, and listened to the rhythm of tools. Steady, purposeful. A sound that reminded me of the years when George used to fix things just to feel useful. When Bernard finished, he stepped back and said, "They won't be silent, but they'll hold better." "Good," I said. "We don't mind a little noise around here." The next morning, Sophia showed up with a basket. "Open it," she said, practically bouncing. Inside, new cloth napkins, hand-stitched with little flowers. "Made them this week," she said, "for the table." She looked proud, nervous, a little girl and a grown woman all at once. "They're beautiful," I said. "They're real," she said. "They'll stain, but I thought maybe that's the point." I folded one gently. Exactly the point. Later that afternoon, as the house settled into its usual hush, I sat by the window and thought of the old tablecloths I used to iron for holidays. Always pressed, always perfect. But no one remembered them. No one ever said, "Thank you for the crisp corners." Now the napkins had crooked stitches and smudges from jam and ink, and they felt more sacred than any fine linen I ever owned. Around dusk, the doorbell rang again. It was Rebecca. But this time, she wasn't alone. She stood with a woman about her age, short hair, soft sweater, hands tucked nervously into her pockets. "This is Julie," Rebecca said, eyes steady. "She's my partner." She waited for me to flinch. I didn't. "Hello, Julie," I said, stepping aside. "Come in. We've got lemon tart." Julie smiled, a little stunned. "You're not surprised?" "I'm not 20, I said. "And I've been paying attention longer than either of you have been breathing." Rebecca looked like she might cry. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us. I poured tea. Julie offered to help, but I waved her off. "Some things you do yourself." They told me about their apartment, the job Rebecca had left, the new one she was starting, Julie's parents, who hadn't taken the news well. "I wanted to tell you sooner," Rebecca said, "but I didn't want it to be a fight." "It's not," I said. "It's just truth. And around here, we let that sit at the table." They stayed until the streetlights came on. Before they left, Rebecca asked if they could come to one of the Wednesdays. "If it's okay," she added quickly. "It's not a club," I said. "It's a room. It opens. You walk in. That's all." Julie hugged me, quick, firm. Rebecca didn't cry. Not then. But when I stood in the doorway after they walked out, I saw her lean her head against Julie's shoulder, and I knew. She'd found something here, too. Maybe not the same thing I had, but close. That night, I took the flyer down from the fridge and made a new one. Same teacup drawing, same soft colors. New words. Wednesdays at Nancy's. Come as you are. Leave less alone. And beneath it I wrote, "This is not a program. It's a promise." Winter came quietly that year. No first storm, no great drop in temperature, just a slow fade. Leaves gave up their color one by one. The wind stiffened. The light grew tired earlier. By mid-November, the house felt different. Not colder, heavier, like it was bracing. I lit more candles in the afternoons, set out thicker blankets on the chairs, stocked the pantry with flour, sugar, tins of soup, tea. People still came. The circle stayed steady, like a heartbeat. Sometimes we had 10, sometimes just 3. Sometimes no one said much at all, and that was all right too. On one such afternoon, I sat alone in the kitchen, steeping chamomile for myself. I'd expected Joyce and Gloria, but both had called to cancel. Colds, they said. Nothing serious. I wasn't disappointed. I was content. That surprised me. A knock came just after 4. I opened the door to find Theo standing there, no coat, cheeks flushed, holding a folded piece of construction paper. Leanne was a few steps behind him, her hands full with grocery bags. "He insisted on bringing this to you first," she said, catching her breath. "Said he couldn't wait until next week." Theo held out the paper. It was a drawing. Crude, childlike, a table with chairs all around it. Stick figures. Cups. A window. Me, clearly, with gray scribbles for hair and a smile bigger than my face. At the top, in messy letters, "Nancy's house is the best house." I knelt down, took the paper gently, and kissed the top of his head. "Thank you," I whispered. He shrugged, already running back to help his mother. That night, I taped the drawing to the inside of the front door, so that anyone who left, or hesitated to come in, would see it. The holidays approached. It was my first in years without decorations, not because I was bitter, because I was busy. The gatherings continued, the books rotated, the faces deepened. One Wednesday, Sophia read aloud from a poem she wrote. The room was so still when she finished, I could hear my own heart. Bernard fixed the broken lock on the hallway closet. Gloria crocheted a blanket for the reading chair. Miriam brought her niece, who didn't speak a word, but stayed the full hour and asked for a second cup of cocoa. Rebecca came too, sometimes alone, sometimes with Julie, sometimes just long enough to sit with me while I folded napkins or shelled peas. We didn't talk about the past anymore. It didn't need to be dug up again. It had said what it came to say. Instead, she helped. She listened. She came back. A few days before Christmas, I received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Just a name I didn't recognize. Inside, a brief note. I came to your house once with Ezra. I didn't speak. But you gave me cake, and it was the first kindness I'd had in months. I've moved on now, to another city. But I wanted you to know. That day mattered. You reminded me I was still worth feeding. No name at the bottom, just a drawing of a teacup. I tucked it into the notebook, between the page where I'd written, "We do not know who we save when we keep the door open, but someone always walks through." On Christmas Eve, I didn't bake the usual roast. I made soup. 3 kinds. Luis helped stir. Gloria chopped vegetables with a speed that made me nervous. Leanne brought cornbread. Bernard set the table. Joyce arrived late and muttered, "I told myself I wasn't coming, but the house dragged me in." It was snowing lightly. Outside, the world was all quiet white. Inside, it was warmth and laughter and the low hum of Nat King Cole on the old radio. No one asked about presents. No one gave speeches. We just ate. Sophia stood up near the end, shy, hands in her pockets, and said, "This is the only place I feel like a person right now, so thanks." She sat back down quickly, face red, but we heard her, and that was the point. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the window in the dark. The street was silent, the snow still falling, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the ache of absence. I felt the truth of presence. In the chair left pulled out. In the mug someone forgot to rinse. In the laughter still tucked into the corners of the house. This wasn't the family I raised. It was the one I chose. And somehow, they chose me back. January brought a stillness I hadn't known in years. Not the kind that comes from emptiness. The other kind. The kind that settles in when things are finally where they're meant to be. Even the wind seemed softer. Not kinder, just honest. The gatherings continued. More quietly now. Winter does that to people, makes them quieter, closer. We wore scarves and thick socks, sat nearer to the heater. The teacups steamed longer. The bread cooled faster. But the voices stayed warm. Sophia had begun bringing small slips of paper, each with a question written in her careful print. Not dramatic questions, not heavy, just real. What's the kindest thing someone ever did for you? What scent takes you back the fastest? When did you last feel like yourself? People answered in their own time, sometimes aloud, sometimes by nodding or smiling, or just sitting a little taller. Rebecca offered to print the questions on cards. "So they don't get soggy from cocoa spills," she said. She brought them in a box, neatly tied with ribbon. We kept them in the center of the table. 1 card, every week. 1 question. 1 opening. The trust in that room, it wasn't earned all at once. It had grown like roots. Invisible at first, then everywhere. Bernard started staying after to help with cleanup. He never said why. I never asked. One day, I caught him humming while he dried the teacups. It sounded like a lullaby. Gloria began teaching Theo how to knit. He was terrible at it, but he kept trying. "He sits still longer when his hands are busy," Leanne said. I didn't think that was possible. Even Joyce softened. She began bringing extra jam. "Just in case," she'd mutter. But we all knew she'd started making a second jar every week. People began leaving small things behind, not by accident. Tokens, a button, a pressed flower, a pencil with someone's initials, a postcard from 1974, a smooth stone, a half-finished crossword. I placed them all in a wooden bowl in the hallway, the bowl of left things. But they didn't feel lost. They felt offered. That month, I received a letter from Jonathan. It wasn't long. He didn't apologize. He just wrote, "I heard from Rebecca that you're doing something with the house. She says you've got a group, that you've found people. I don't know what to say about that. I guess I'm glad. I didn't know you were lonely. I thought you were just private. Anyway, I hope it's going well." There was no return address, no number, just his name at the bottom. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I folded the letter and placed it in the notebook. I didn't need a response. I had a life. The Wednesday after, the question Sophia pulled from the card box was, "What do you want to be remembered for?" The room fell quiet. It wasn't the kind of question people rush to answer. Miriam said, "I want them to say I made good bread." Tasha, who hadn't been in weeks, whispered, "That I didn't give up, even when it was hard." Gloria said, "That I didn't let kindness rot in me." Ezra just said, "I'm still figuring that out." When it came to me, I looked at the chipped teapot, the napkins, the pencil left behind, the warmth in that room. "I don't need to be remembered," I said. "But I want this feeling to stay in someone, even if they forget where it came from." No one argued. That evening, as the snow started again, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. Just one. The kind of light you'd only see if you were walking by slowly, with your head turned the right way. The kind of light that says, someone is home. The last Wednesday of February came with sun. Not the kind that warms the bones, just the kind that reminds you the cold won't last forever. We set the table, as always. Nothing fancy. Napkins folded by Joyce, who now insisted on doing it her way. Bread baked by Sophia. Tea brewed by Gloria, who had somehow become the one everyone trusted to get it just right. The room filled slowly. Leanne and Theo came early. Bernard arrived with a small box of screws and a mysterious smile. Miriam brought a new neighbor. Rebecca and Julie came in just as I was lighting the candle by the window. Everyone found their chair. The card Sophia drew from the box read, "What has changed in you?" There was a long pause. Then Tasha said, "I don't wait for people to need me to feel like I matter." Gloria added, "I stopped apologizing before I speak." Luis said simply, "I ask for help now." Miriam looked at me. I stopped thinking quiet meant useless. Ezra said, "I started believing that how I feel is reason enough." Even Joyce cleared her throat. I stopped thinking people were either strong or broken. Turns out you can be both. They turned to me. I held my cup for a moment, feeling the steam against my chin. "I stopped believing I was finished," I said. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, reverent, alive. That day, Bernard handed me a folded sheet before leaving. "It's from all of us," he said. "Don't argue, just read it later." After everyone had gone and the dishes were drying on the rack, I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a short note, one line from each of them. "Thank you for the room. Thank you for the warmth. Thank you for the second chance. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for showing us how. Thank you for staying when no one else did. Thank you for making this a place I come back to." No signatures, no names, just presence. I placed it in the notebook. Last page. Then I closed the cover and sat with my hands resting on top of it. The house didn't feel transformed anymore. It felt whole. One day, it would be someone else's. That's already in motion, in the trust, in the documents, in the instructions that Mr. Avery now knows by heart. One day, I won't sit at this table, but someone will. Someone will open that front door with wind on their coat and silence in their chest, and they'll smell tea or cinnamon or old books, and they'll know they're not invisible anymore. That matters to me. That's enough. Now, if you've read all this and it stirred something in you, some ache, some breath you forgot you'd been holding, then maybe you're one of us, one of the ones who were always almost seen. If so, I'll say what I tell them every week. Come when you can. Bring what you carry. Leave what you must. And if no one else has told you lately, you matter, even here, even now. So don't forget to look up once in a while. There's still light in windows. And sometimes it's for you.